The topic of the next panel is strategies for effective philanthropic giving. How do you ensure the most bang for your buck when you give? And I'm going to just introduce the moderator who will then bring up her panelists on the stage. Jen Jope is the editor-in-chief of Giving Compass, which is focused on helping connect philanthropists to a knowledge hub of philanthropic content so that they can learn, connect, and take action. And she's also a great friend of Indiaspora. We are delighted to have Jen. Jen, if you'd like to come up to the stage, please. Thank you.
Thank you. You can all join. Good afternoon. So we are here to talk about strategies for effective philanthropic giving and how we can ensure that we are making the most impact when we provide funding. So today I want to first kind of introduce these three folks and let them talk a little bit about what their work is, and then we'll dive into the topic itself. So to my immediate left is Jessie Krafft, Senior Vice President of External Affairs at CAF America. And then in the middle here is Josh Mandell, Chief Operating Officer of Halcyon. And then Smita Siddhanti at the very end, President of EnDyna. So today we have already heard a lot about strategies like collaboration and risk-taking. We've also heard a lot about the joy of giving. So I want to talk about all of these things with these three folks to sort of hear how we can expand on those topics and just be more effective. So first, I want to let each of you talk about your work and who you are. Jessie?
Sure. Yeah, I'll start. As she mentioned, I'm Jessie Krafft, the Senior Vice President of External Affairs at CAF America. So we're a public charity in the US and essentially work as an intermediary grant maker. So we work with all types of donors in the US, corporations primarily, but also many foundations and individuals who want to give internationally. So we assist them in doing so by undertaking all of the IRS regulatory compliance and the federal compliance that's necessary in order to make cross-border grants in a tax-effective way. And in so doing, we also look at the risks that we're taking in making the grants and understanding the charities that we're giving to so we can best advise our donors on where to give, and how to manage those grants. So we undertake all of that on behalf of our donors.
Great. Josh.
I'm Josh Mandell. I'm a Chief Operating Officer at Halcyon. We are a social enterprise incubator and arts lab located about 5 blocks from here. So I had the shortest commute of all of us. We basically have a competitive program where we invest in mostly for-profit, early stage companies that are looking to solve major 21st century challenges in education, in health, in civic engagement, in energy, in environment. And we bring them from all over the world. They live with us for 5 months. We have a very different kind of model as far as business incubation is concerned, in that we're a nonprofit incubator that doesn't take any equity in the companies, but we invest in them in a lot of other ways. So in a way, we're a bridge between donors and the donees. So we also do the same thing for emerging artists from around the world who are looking to have more of a social impact through their art.
I'm Smita Siddhanti. So my background is very different than others who are actively engaged in organizations working directly. So I work I'm part of Indiaspora and work in a space between 2 separate donors as well as the working at the rural level. So I'm coming with different dimension here of my exposure to, I'm a president of TIE DC chapter, but TIE is a global organization of Indian CEOs and Indian companies around the globe. And I represent those who give, hopefully. And there's a whole social impact investing. That is an effort that I am leading with others in TIE, which is different from my involvement at the rural level. I've been engaged for the last 25 years with rural development in village level near Wardha, which is where Gandhiji started his whole Sevagram movement of independence. And there we work in about 150 villages with about 50,000 village women. And there are 150 enterprises that they have started with self-help groups. So I not only come from that perspective in adding to what we're talking about here, and total belief of social entrepreneurship here.
Thank you. So today we've heard a lot about sort of the large-scale issues that India is facing and how much collaboration that's going to require. But I think it also requires risk and risk-taking. This morning during the climate change panel, we heard, I believe somebody said, philanthropy is great for testing solutions. So I want to throw this to the panel and ask you, how should donors think about taking risks and why should they take risks? So Jessie, maybe start with you.
Yeah. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we approach, vetting charities for risk a little bit later. But just generally, it's really important to take risks in a way that you understand what risk you're taking on. So, it's important not to go into that blindly, but to understand that you are taking a risk and understand the partner that you're working with to take that risk. So we really manage our philanthropy on behalf of our donors with what we call our risk-based approach, where we undertake our due diligence process to understand, how established is this organization? What is the project they're doing? And have they done it before? And if not, what are they doing to prepare themselves for that program to, mitigate risks that might come up during that process? For us, it's really important when we think about risk, it's important to support local, small grassroots organizations as well. And there are many donors that shy away from that approach because many of them don't have, audited financials and, they might not have like a long proven track record or a web presence or, kind of some independent verifications around them. But CAF America and our board of directors find it extremely important in trying to find impact locally and trying to have the most impact on a local level, to really find local grassroots organizations that know the communities and know the needs deeply and inherently. And but in so doing, you are taking a risk because you don't know if the organizations have the best financial controls in place or have everything that they need to manage the program without risk. But it's important as a partner from our perspective to go in and build their capacity a little bit and help them understand, what risks they are taking, and then help them to mitigate those risks in the process. So it's just really important to look at it from that angle. Additionally, we're starting to work with more organizations that are not traditionally registered charities. And this is for a number of reasons. Around the world, it's becoming more difficult to register as a charity for a number of reasons. And we find that, many donors say, well, if they're not a registered charity, we don't want to work with them because they don't want to take that risk. But because of this closing space that we're seeing in civil society internationally, it's really important to actually take a different approach and maybe work with organizations that are differently structured because they're often doing great work. And we'll talk about, working with for-profit entities and others a little bit later too.
Actually, I think that's a great segue, Josh, if you want to sort of talk about that model and how non-traditional it is and what people should, is that risky to invest in a for-profit that's doing social work? So,
risk tolerance is right at the top of Halcyon's core values, and it has to be. If you've ever worked with a startup or an early stage company, if risk tolerance isn't part of their DNA, chances are they're not going to do that well. They're not going to be competitive, and they're not going to be that kind of chance taker that a traditional and or impact investor is going to be interested in. As an organization, we also have to be incredibly risk tolerant. My theory is that every deep down inside, everybody kind of wants to be a startup investor. It's like one of the coolest jobs out there, but most people just don't know how to, don't have the resources to do it, don't have the pipeline of companies to look at. So our approach is we do the due diligence on the early stage companies, for-profit and nonprofit, that limit the risk of both donors and investors towards those companies. So the level of scrutiny that we're putting these companies through, the level of rigor that we put into our process for selecting companies is comparable to what due diligence for a venture capital or traditional seed stage investor is going to be looking at. So in that way, we try to mitigate risk for donors, which from a getting donations perspective, we've brought in an entirely new universe of donors who look at an investment in Halcyon as an investment in some of the top problem solvers in the world. So in a way, we're kind of an umbrella for who we think are going to deliver on some of the best ideas, regardless of sector. So we not only live and breathe risk tolerance as an organization, but we actually have an entire curricula that teaches the pragmatics of risk tolerance to our actual startups that we incubate. And actually, in the United States, we take failure for granted, and everybody talks about how great failure is and how it's such a great way to learn. But in countries like India and lots of other countries, it's actually not so easy to fail and just instantly recover and then pivot and regroup and win again. Whereas in the United States, it's kind of like worn like we don't encourage our companies to fail, but some people wear it as a badge of honor. And we have these fail fests where everybody talks about how great their failures were. And I don't encourage that at all. But the ability, risk for governments, risks for large companies, risks for investors, we all need to kind of share this level of risk. And we think about that every day with every single company or artist that we invest in.
Great, thank you. So Smita, can you speak to
Right,
taking
so
risks?
I can add two things to it. I think that the way the giving or giving has changed over time. So giving was, as an observer more than a real, I'm a giver probably, but it's a different way to think about things. That it used to be traditional, older, more higher income people gave charities. And there was traditional charities, you give to registered charities. United Way was like the top of the list, right? So we all gave as we gave, but the new generation of givers that we are looking at, the whole millennial generation, is an entirely different way of risk-taking. Their risk-taking of giving has a lot to do with the products that they're using. That is, the proof is in the pudding. So they can say, we are only investing in companies or products and things we use every day that have to do with, environmentally sound, equity, just equality and whatever they believe in. So they would do research for those kind of things, and they actually invest in that. So the risk-taking of giving has gone lesser and lesser, even if it's a crowdfunding and various platforms through which they are giving, and increasingly so massively giving, even though they have lesser means than the traditional giving. So my take is that the risk-taking definition is changing over time than the typical registration of and the criteria that we were going with the KPIs change.
And I think you bring up a good point about sort of the next generation of givers and how they're doing philanthropy differently. So I'd be curious if any of you on the panel have an opinion about, is the next generation more hands-on? How are they being philanthropic besides, giving just their dollars?
Just one point on that, as far as the time frame. I think that the new generation of givers, just like with everything else, wants to see results right away. Needs like instant gratification, gratification. Look, and the same thing goes for philanthropy and for donors. And the companies we invest in are the companies that we think are going to be able to most cheaply, most effectively deploy the right kind of technology, solution, service that's needed, especially where governments and large corporations have failed. So for us, we think that is the start of a potential problem. 21st century challenges are complex, they're long-term. We may invest in a company that has a short-term solution, but I think that the trend is for companies to be able to show, early-stage companies to show that they have a sustainable track and that they're looking at solving a much longer-term problem, which means that the donor community is going to have to catch up and not just expect immediate results. They're going to have to really attack this long-term. So I think that from a timing perspective, there's an education which needs to take place with a new generation of donors that want to see results. They want those impact metrics. They want to be able to write that report and show that our donations are making sense, whether it's CSR or something more active. My fear is that we'll get so focused on immediate results that we'll lose sight of the big picture and the big problems where donors can be more strategic.
I'll take a little bit of exception to that, because I don't think that the immediate gratification has to do with them wanting to see the real impact that day or that year. I think they want to see that this effort is in a longer run, either doing something to minority businesses or women or things that are more organic, sustainable food products, sustainable lines. I take an exception that I think they have a much 100% different view of the world than we had of solving issues in terms of giving a fish or feeding the people when they need it versus teaching them how to fish, right? So I think that my observation is the amount of giving, if you see 490 million or something like that on crowdfunding, that happens instantly. And just because of the purpose of giving, whether it's for whatever injustice that they see needs to be removed. So I don't think we need to lose heart that they need instant gratification. So maybe that helps.
Jessie, I don't know if you have an observation on that topic. Or...
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting conversation because we definitely, because we work with such a wide variety of donors, we see it very differently amongst all of these different angles. But, I'd say one challenge that we are having is, maybe it's not necessarily immediate, but what most donors want now is a lot of data on impact, in different ways. And then we're still seeing this struggle with donors also not wanting to support any overhead costs. And then they don't really realize how much effort it actually takes to gather that data and to submit all of the reports all of these donors are asking them to fill, right? That takes overhead costs. And I think what I'm seeing is, our charity partners are really struggling with that divide as far as, they're not willing to fund this, yet they want this out of, the work that we're doing on behalf of, with these grants. So I think that's a challenge that is going to take education for donors and charities to come together on in terms of understanding if there's a more sustainable way around that, and collecting the data donors want at the same time.
That makes sense.
Are these donors more the grants and that kind of people who give, because they are the ones who are more demanding than the
It's a little bit of both.
I
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. Mostly the larger grants, but yeah.
Gotcha. So an effective strategy, obviously, I hope, includes vetting organizations, right? So this came up earlier today, just what kind of criteria, do people use to decide whether an organization is worthy of their dollars? But I'd like to hear from the folks on the panel. Jessie, we can start with you. What does CAF America use for criteria to decide what charities you're going to work with or put your dollars toward?
Yeah. I could go into a lot of detail about the approach and what we collect and everything and how we actually get to what we're doing. And I'm happy to have that conversation later if anyone is interested. But just from a more high level perspective, the first thing that we do to approach any of our grantee partners is to understand who they are as an organization. As I mentioned, we don't only work with charities. So we don't first go out and say, okay, are they a registered charity? And then go from there. We actually, pick up their registration document and pick up their governing document and say, how are they governed? Is this a nonprofit? Are we working with a for-profit? What kind of organization are we working with as kind of a baseline? Because the rest of our review will go from there. If they're a for-profit entity, we'll definitely handle them a bit differently because we know that they're, what we as a charity have to make charitable grants. So we have to work with that for-profit in a way that they can kind of mold a project that will be fully charitable and money will not go to for-profit efforts. So from there, though, we're really kind of building this framework for our risk-based approach to understand, what controls do we need to put in place to ensure that our money will be spent charitably, will be spent as we intend and as our donors intend. So we kind of frame it around that top-down from understanding who the organization is from the beginning. And then, we work globally, but we actually have an office in Delhi in India. So for us, we actually do a ton of work locally and in India, and it's really helpful to also, from that vetting perspective, have a local partner on the ground that can give us more information about organizations and maybe even do site visits. So that's something we are able to do in India because we have an office there, which is really helpful. And another perspective that we have to take is not only understanding, the risks on our end and, understanding the organization and the relationship we're stepping into, but what are the local laws that they have and the local challenges that they have in country that we need to help our partners mitigate. So it's really a partnership. So in India, for example, of course, we have to make sure the organization is under the FCRA registration, the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, and that we're granting to the bank account that's linked to that registration. That's really important for compliance on their end to mitigate risks that they have, legal risks that they have on their end. And fortunately, fortunately and unfortunately, the law has been in place for quite some time in India, and charities know how to work under that law. We work in places like China where they have a brand new law that does the same thing but is much more strict. And so part of what we have to do is make sure, in our vetting process, make sure the charities understand their local legal obligations to that law before we send money to them, because that's a risk that they have, and we need to make sure that they're mitigating it. And unfortunately, this part of our vetting process is becoming more and more important because these types of laws that actually really had their beginning in India in many ways with FCRA are really spreading throughout the world of, being more prohibitive about foreign contributions going into these countries, and then being more locally prohibitive about which types of organizations can register as charities. A lot of human rights organizations are not able to register as charities in many countries. And so that's something we need to help as donors, be empathetic to and understand and help them mitigate those risks as part of our due diligence process. So it just takes a lot of angles.
Thank you.
So we provide 5 months of free housing to every fellow that we bring in, a living stipend, free corporate services from all of our corporate partners, mentorship, advisors, free legal service, technology service, the list goes on and on. And we don't charge them anything. We take zero equity in the companies. So we're obviously going to take a great deal of care when it comes to who we select for the program. And as a result, we get now over 1,000 applications from over 60 countries, India, of course, being a large source of applicants into the program. And we accept 16 a year. So about between 1 and 2. It's probably harder than getting into Georgetown. But it's a play that we've made. And there are 3 things I'd say. I mean, it's a very rigorous application process, but I'd say there are 3 things we're looking for in a company or a nonprofit, any venture that we're going to invest in. One, they have to we want them early stage. So we want these ideas new, we want them fresh. We don't want if they've generated over $500,000 in revenue or fundraised the same amount, they're probably already far enough along where there's other opportunities for them out there. So we want companies that are very, very early stage. The idea has to be truly transformative. We'll get 50 applications for water purification deployment and systems, but what's going to be that truly transformative idea that can be scaled from a community level to a national level to a global level? And then the third one, I think, is really the most important, which is how close are you, the founder, to the problem, and are you the person to solve the problem? We're going to get so much technical prowess out there, so many talented young people, although our startups range in age from 19 to 70. So it's not just that kind of caricature of a 19-year-old Silicon Valley startup that we get at Halcyon. Are they the person that is really going to inspire building an amazing team? Are they going to inspire traditional investors to invest in social enterprise? And are they the kind of founder that are never going to give up no matter what? So finding that kind of stuff out over Skype and or via a written application is really hard. But we've kind of made a science out of it. And we look back at our data, we see what would they able to tell us? We're constantly revising our application process, putting together very diverse groups of panels that actually look at the applicants. So I think as an organization, the vetting process and the selection of investments that we want to make is probably the most important thing that we do, and we do it twice a year. And we've tried to avoid using any kind of machine learning in order to do that kind of vetting, which is what a lot of people do. It's really a hands-on personal exercise. So that's a very serious operation, like I said, comparable to due diligence from what a bank or an investor would want to look at.
Sure. Smita, do you want to respond?
Yeah, no, so I have a different angle about how to give. So since I'm not an organization that distributes money, I'm talking of the perspective of those who give money. Mm-hmm. So one who wants to give money wants to be engaged much more than than just write a check. There's a definite change that I see, or at least I see in the circles of the older generation like me. In the younger generation, they certainly want to be very, very measureful. They want the measure of what the social change they're making, whatever that measure is, whether it's the product or it's the process, right? While those who are older would like to get more engaged with knowing if I have this big doctors association giving money, I want to see how many blind people are getting corrected their vision, or how many women and health, and they actually want to be engaged with that. And similar to the future of giving is going to be more and more engagement of some sort. Whether we as NGO organizations here have a way of engaging the donor, or the way of somehow making a community feeling with them, whether it's on social media community because it's a purpose, and people will say, I want clean water, and there's a community of clean water companies that are working in social enterprises. However we do that, somehow engaging them in some measure, whatever that measure is going to be the criteria of givers.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. So Jessie and Josh, you sort of just touched on this a bit, but the value of intermediaries, and if I'm a donor and I don't have the time to do due diligence, but I still want to make sure I'm being impactful, can you talk about, and Smita, I want you to talk about this too, because I think you have a good perspective, just the value of an intermediary, somebody that's sort of that middleman that can do the due diligence for me as a donor. How does that become part of a donor strategy? Should that be a major part of their strategy?
So I'm going to do the classic Washington pivot, which is just answer the question that I wanted to get as opposed to the one I got.
I'm losing control of the panel.
It's related though. It's related. I can't help myself. Sorry. So we get a lot of. Look, our organization survives exclusively on the kindness of individuals, of corporations, of grant-making organizations, philanthropies, but there are a lot of them who are donors in other respects, right? They, Amazon Web Services is a very large donor of ours. They want to bring. Their play is that they want to bring cloud services to developing countries, to emerging economies. They want to provide technology platforms for people to actually grow and scale early stage companies. So they're very much aligned with our mission. So they invest in us by not just providing free, cloud credits to all of our startups, but by providing free pro bono technical services to all of our companies. So what we've done is we've given donors, same thing with several law firms in Washington, same thing with large banks in the region, same things with large consulting companies. The way they put it to us is that they fight the wars during the day so they can join the rebellion at night at Halcyon. And they provide those services pro bono because they want to have a very hands-on relationship with these solutions. And so they come in and they provide their time completely voluntary to help these companies solve their problems. And we call it, for practical reasons, in-kind services. But I see that, my CEO is not here, so I can say it, there's no substitute for being able to have operational funding to continue doing what we're doing, but we wouldn't be able to do what we do if it wasn't for that kind of in-kind expert services that donors who you wouldn't think would provide that kind of support where they do. And so we've done a lot of work in articulating how the impact we have is actually good for these companies to invest in. And I don't consider that CSR. You know, I consider that actually working with some of these solutions and trying to bring them to fruition.
Sure, no, that makes a lot of sense.
So I take a very different angle to what the question was. The question was,
I'll just get off the stage.
because I think your question, if I understand correctly, is this middle, the giving through organizations is what I understand.
Yeah.
So vetting those organizations who are actually giving to the final end product. So having worked with several of them, and several here in the room, I can tell you that. There are organizations like EduGirls, and they are doing education for girls, right? So working with them to know, because none of us, the givers cannot be directly knowing exactly what the village level, school level, what's going on. Or the same thing with Ekal Vidyalaya, or same thing with Pratham. I mean, some are a whole lot bigger than others, but there's a lot of transparency of how they do their work. A lot of transparency in terms of the impact they're making. And they have made a great effort in letting others know what they're doing. And same thing with Wheels, an organization that I know with all the IITs that have joined hands in India to make this organization, which makes a difference in water, energy, livelihood, environment, and sustainability. And so they are transparent in telling you where they're putting their money. And so I think as donors, these are the organizations we'll have to hold up. And I'm sure there are 100 others that I don't know about. But that somewhere would be nice to have like a portal where you could go and say, really, I want to know about this organization and its transparency or whatever. And ultimately, and I applaud Indiaspora to even bring this forum together constantly, because I always envision that just like you go to a microbiology conference and there are like 1,000 scientists working exactly in that area, I would love to see every year like 3 different conferences of NGOs working in several similar sectors where they could really share, like education is a sector. I would love to see a whole big conference where NGOs share their best practices, their challenges, their funding issues, and partnerships, just like we do in industry or health sector or a social entrepreneurship. And we haven't yet done that. So this may be a good start. So MR, long way to go for us to make that happen. I hope that
No, that was helpful. Thank you. And so, Jessie, obviously, Krafft America is an intermediary. So
I will answer the question.
Thank you.
We are a very classic intermediary, so I think it's a bit easier.
Now that I think of it, we're an intermediary too.
Yeah.
You two are.
Yeah.
You are.
Just never thought of it that way.
So there's several reasons. I think there's kind of the practical aspect of it of, if you work with an intermediary, you're kind of relieving yourself of the risk and administrative burden of actually making that grant, and, entering into grant agreements, undertaking the necessary due diligence, the required IRS due diligence if you're going cross borders and things like that. But, I think sort of speaking to Smita's point as well, I think you can really benefit from the aggregated expertise. We make thousands of grants to thousands of charities in hundreds of countries every year. And we learn from every single grant that we make, whether it's a failure or a success or somewhere in between, we're learning a lot. And we have a lot of donors that come to us for that reason, to see, what are other donors supporting? How are they approaching these issues? We want to do something fighting climate change in India or something like that. And we have this database. We have offices around the world, one in India, in Delhi, that we can reach out to. So as an intermediary, we have a lot of resources that we can tap into to answer any of the questions that you might have about your own philanthropy or your foundation's philanthropy. So I think that kind of aggregated expertise is really important to tap into. And then, just another practical aspect is that, we have a database between Krafft America and Krafft India of thousands of charities that we have already vetted, and that we've worked with in the past and could share those experiences. So that's also another powerful resource that you can use if you work with an intermediary. So there are a lot of intermediaries out there too. So I think if there's a specific issue area, and there are intermediaries that focus on just supporting children or just supporting environmental issues and things like that. So I think with the intermediary groups, there's a lot of expertise that you could benefit from.
Fantastic. So I think we have a few minutes, and I want to give the audience some time for questions. But before we do, I just want to give each of you a quick opportunity to touch on anything that you may not have touched on, and just share with donors when they think about effective strategies. What can we leave them with?
So thank you. I'll do a quick commercial. Our application is open until October 10th. We take applications from any early stage social enterprise from anywhere in the world. Our web address with the application is halcyonhouse.org. If you know any organizations, obviously Indiaspora, if you want to put it out to your network, the more applications and the higher quality of early stage companies that look to be incubated with Halcyon and in the United States, we think the better the solutions are going to be that they're going to come up with. So one quick commercial to apply to Halcyon. We do accept 16 companies a year. And the one message on donors is that our experience is that investing in individuals that are closest to the problem or have some personal connection to the problem. If you ask any of our founders, why are you trying to develop a smart pill bottle to combat the opioid crisis? Why are you figuring out a way to paint fiber optic cable on the surface of roads? Why are you building an oxygen monitor for somebody's ear? I mean, these are like really, really complex issues, and they're doing it because they have firsthand experience with that issue. So I think a big part of smart investment, smart donor strategies is to don't just invest in an organization that claims to be and/or has some sort of ancillary connection to an issue, but find the person that is actually living and breathing and has experienced that problem. Those are the people who are going to stick with it to the end. Those are the people worth investing in.
Thank you.
I exactly don't know how to conclude this, but I definitely know that the social change will happen only by economic empowerment. And economic empowerment will not happen unless we have the skills that we can give people, whether it's education or it's social enterprises. Because unless that is where the focus is, and without connecting, empowering the NGOs working on the ground, who are not traditional organizations who know how exactly to do marketing for themselves or even bring money to themselves, that is where the biggest help is needed. Unless we leverage the NGOs to make the change and empower them with the kind of skills that are needed, which they will not get themselves, we will not make this the final social change. So we could do all that we want to collect the money and all the effort, which could be a one-time effort, but a long, sustainable effort will only come from economic change at the bottom.
Great.
Thank you.
I think I've said most of what I want to say, but I think just as a parting word, due diligence is important, and I think not enough individual donors are thinking about that. They're used to just looking at an IRS charity database and saying, okay, that one's good. And even in your domestic giving, it's important. And then also, there are just another piece of what we do is we also work with, I've talked a lot about what we do with donors, but we also work with a lot of foreign charities that want to fundraise in the United States, but don't have the funds or legal expertise to open their own charity in the US. We can actually open funds for those foreign charities and undertake all of the administrative work for them in the US, and then they just do their fundraising and we can transfer the funds to them. So I think that might be relevant for this group to know that there are, and we're not the only ones that do that, so there are tools for organizations that want to fundraise in the US but don't have the means to open their own charity. So
great, thank you. So I think we have we have a lot of questions. The back table there.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Smita, for mentioning about the work Wheels is doing. And Wheels meaning water, healthcare, education, electricity, livelihoods, and sustainability. And since this is a conference about giving, I just want to mention that we're having another conference about giving, but under the aspect of leveraging technology for enhancing social impact. This will be under the Wheels Global Foundation format, umbrella. We have had a series of conferences already in Philadelphia and India. And the next one is going to be in February 14-15, where we'll also be inviting a lot of the corporate sector from CII, the Confederation of Indian Industry. So those of you who are interested in CSR funds should mark your calendars, February 14-15 in Delhi. We would also have, as participants, Government of India officials, because without their involvement, delivery on the ground is not easy, and that helps a lot. So I am a former Indian Foreign Service official. I've been ambassador and secretary in the Government of India. So with my connects, we'll be having a lot of those officials also participating in the conference. Besides the CII, we are also inviting the SCOPE, which is the Public Standing Committee on Public Enterprise, and the other NGO partners on the ground, like Mission Samriddhi, the IEEE, the ECAL, Pratham, etc. So that was just one part of it. The other is just to see about what MR is doing. I want to compliment MR and his team for the great work in terms of the Chalo Give and all the other initiatives and this very focused conference. And congratulations to the panelists for their presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We've got 2 minutes, so talk fast. In the back table there's, I think, 2 questions.
Hi, my name is Bhavik, and I work with the Philanthropic arm of a private company in Orange. My question is just going off Josh's mention about the application process. How are the donors sort of democratizing the application process for smaller NGOs? Because just to give you an example from what I'm trying to say, MasterCard Foundation runs 6-month camps in Africa so that applicants who are not well-versed writing 6,000-word essays first understand how to write that. And then they have a competition or whatever, an application deadline where they put everyone on the same stage. Right now, a lot of big NGOs have grant writers who they employ, who are then responsible for writing the right things that you guys want to read or what we want to read. How do you ensure smaller NGOs sort of have the equal ground and have the bandwidth to sort of invest? Thank you.
Yeah, so democratizing access to Halcyon is just, this is just our example. We do our best. The fact is that 1,000 applicants of social enterprise founders for a global program is decimal dust compared to the number of probably really high quality top social enterprise founders in the world. What we do is we partner with a lot of organizations in the US and abroad that we feel has the most diverse outreach mechanisms to some of the toughest places in the world. For example, if you're looking just locally, we work with, when Halcyon first started out, all of our applicants were coming from the immediate DC area. Now over 70% of our applicants are coming from outside the United States. And our biggest answer on the question is, how did you find out about Halcyon? Someone told me. So it's this network of entrepreneurs that is very tight. What we really try and do is work with those intermediary organizations that we feel has the most diverse footprint, that has a good reputation amongst community village level operations. And we have successfully attracted a lot of applicants from places that we've frankly never heard of, and trying to solve problems that we didn't frankly know even existed. So we think we're starting to penetrate it, but the fact is that we can only do the best we can to continue improving our outreach. But I will say that the diversity of the applicant pool, over 54% of our founders are women, over 60% are founders of color. This cohort of entrepreneurs, 70% of them are from outside of the United States. So we feel that the diversity of the people that we let into the program adds strength to the value of the overall program. So we're all in on diversity. We don't do quotas. We don't say we want to have this or that. It's really based on the diversity and inclusiveness of the application process.
Thanks, Josh. We have
I do
to
want
end.
to add, though, that that's a very, very important question asked.
Yeah.
And it's a very difficult challenge, no question about it. For those who are NGOs on the ground, smaller ones, have no resources of writing. So it's going to take a long time before they can. And they probably need a different kind of competition, a different kind of approach than competing in the
And
world.
just so you know, we have accepted ideas like literally on the back of a napkin, but so transformative. I mean, all they have, they have to have very little grasp of the English language and very little resources. If they can convey what their idea is to us, that's enough for us to go on.
Thank you.
Sorry.
That's okay. Round of applause for the panel. Thank you. Thank you all.